I think every successful person usually looks up to somebody else in life. Be bold, be ambitious, but be humble.
Okay, namaste and welcome to Agastya's Sarga Samvad. It's a series of dialogues with inspiring Indians. So Ram, it's really pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Ram, you've been in Silicon Valley for maybe 40 years now. But is it okay if we start a little bit from where you grew up, which was, Chennai or what used to be called Madras? Your mother had a big influence on you. Can you tell a little bit about her and the kind of influence she had on you?
Yeah, I mean, she was my role model because I lost my father early in life, and my mother then went back, got an education, took a job, and she was a professor at the University of Madras. She's now no more, but she and my grandparents essentially raised me from when I was a child. And so she was a big influence on me, and she especially dinned into me the value of a good education, because she said, that's all I can afford to give you is a good education. I don't have anything else to give you. Right. So that became a big mantra in the family from the very early days.
Right. And at that time, did you have any particular goal about the kind of education or the kind of discipline or that kind of interest you wanted to pursue, or not particular?
Not in those early days. I didn't have clarity about what I wanted to pursue, but I did go to good schools in Chennai, and that helped me have a good foundational basis from where to apply to different schools. But because there was nobody really to me go here or go there, I just was randomly applying to different schools, both especially in the US, because my mother said, why don't you go abroad and study somewhere else? Yep. So I actually never even applied to the IITs at the time.
Yeah.
I may not have gotten in, but that's a different matter. No. But I didn't apply even in those early days.
But that just, just to keep on that, do you think, let's say in school or colleges, do you think it matters to get some kind of input about where you might be good at and what might be suitable for you, do you think?
I think it does not matter at the high school level, because it's too early to know what your interests are. Right. Very few people have clarity of interest at that point. In fact, it's good to be somewhat vague and have different interests. If you have multidisciplinary interests, that actually shows that you're a curious person, that you want to learn a little bit about biology, maybe dabble in political science and learn about history, and maybe also a little bit about literature or something else, and that you're reading a lot, you're listening to, and you're absorbing. So that, I think, is having that broad base, foundational base at the high school level is what's most important, rather than having a clear idea of what you're going to do in the future.
Okay, I think that's a very good input. Thank you. Yeah. Now, just fast forward a little bit to the Bay Area, where you started. You say that Netscape was a turning point in your career. And for those of us listeners who may not know Netscape, can you tell us a little bit about Netscape, and then tell us what you learned from your stint there?
Yeah, I think what happens with most people in their careers is they go along on their journey, they do their work. I'm sure most people are hardworking, And then along comes a lucky break where, you have an inflection point in your career. So it's how you harness that lucky break and take advantage of it is what matters. So it turns out that when I was working in the industry, the tech industry, for the first 10 or 15 years, lots of things were different back then. Capital was scarce. The industry was very young. It was not a big industry. The auto industry was the largest industry, and then the financial industry and healthcare and so on, but it was not tech. So, the choices you made in those days were based on you wanted to be in networking or PC hardware or PC operating system and applications, whatever it was. Those were the choices, and they were mostly bigger companies, people like Microsoft, Cisco, etc. So at that time, leaving to go to a startup that was going to build a browser, which is what Netscape did, I did not know that that was going to be the beginning of the internet. But it turned out it was. And so you don't have a premonition of what is to come. But if you end up at that right place at the right time, and that is the starting point of a new industry, then you get to essentially write your own ticket to success.
That's great. And what did you learn at Netscape that really was helpful for you?
Well, first of all, what you learn is that when this kind of success happens inside of a company, it happens very, very quickly in compressed time. The first thing that Netscape did was, till then, all software was bought packaged, right? So you would go to a store and buy software, you would put it on a floppy disk or on your hard drive on your computer, and that's how it started. Netscape, you downloaded the software directly onto your PC and then installed it, and that was the browser. Today, now most software is consumed that way, but that was not true in 1993, 94. It was the first company to have that idea that you could download the software. The second thing they did was they made that software free for personal use and only charged for business use. So millions of people, so literally from 0 to 100 million happened as almost overnight, because everybody had Ethernet, everybody had PCs, and so they were installing this, and they were installing it in front of Windows. So it became the user interface to the whole internet. So that's what the browser is today. So you use your browser to navigate the net, but it is your gateway to the internet. So that was what was unique about Netscape in the early days.
Right.
First, the idea of distribution directly downloadable, which today we call cloud and so on. And second was the idea that you could come up with a new business model where you actually make no money, but you have a lot of users.
And did you get more and more confident that this is the future, this is how it is going to be? Could you see clearly at that point in mid-90s maybe?
No, I could not. Just like you don't see clearly about what your interests are in high school and going into college even, same way, it is not possible to have that clarity where this is the beginning of something big, because it was so early.
Yeah.
And actually, Netscape had this wild success, and it was a wild ride, but it also at the end was attacked and failed as a company, because it lost to Microsoft, because Microsoft then came up with its own browser, and then Netscape was sold to another company, AOL, at the time. And all this happened in the space of 3-4 years, very quickly. Yep. So you are learning through a fire hose in compressed time.
Right.
So it was a wild success, but that doesn't mean you can measure it in success as in terms of monetary reward. You have to measure it in terms of what you have learned.
Right.
So in that sense, it was a wild success.
Yeah. That's
so looking back in time, today we know that that was a seminal moment in the birth of the internet.
Yeah. And from there, how did you turn to startup investing?
No, I didn't turn to startup investing. I ended up working for another company that was in the consumer internet.
Okay.
So Jungly, which I then sold to Amazon, and then worked at Amazon for a number of years, couple of years. And so after that, when I came back to the Bay Area from Seattle, is when I decided to do this startup investing, which I was sort of doing on the side because I used to see all these startups come to Netscape because they all came to want to buy traffic from us. We had 98% of the world's traffic at one point. And so that process led to a desire to be tempted to be investing in small companies.
Okay, you came at a point where, so you were at an Amazon, let's say, and that was also something which was probably a unique place to be in at that point.
Yeah,
right?
That was another foundational company. There were 3 or 4 foundational companies, and that was one of them at the time. Again, you had no idea that it was that at the time when you were inside it. You'd only know that with the benefit of history and the benefit of time. When you use the word perspective, what that really means is looking backwards in time, right?
Right.
So when somebody has a good perspective, and as a young person, it's possible that you can have a good perspective, but it's more likely you would have that perspective through experience over time.
True.
But that perspective is understanding time and place and understanding how that is relevant to the broader scheme of things.
True.
Broader environment that you operate in. And that was not easy to know about Amazon at that moment, but then over time you understood the importance of it.
Yeah.
So, it disrupted the way you buy things, the way you shop, everything.
Yeah. And what do you today remember of your time? Was it Jeff Bezos and his customer focus or something else?
He was completely focused on the customer and not the competitor.
Okay.
Most companies, have a culture of, let's think about what the competitor is doing. But really, if you focus on the customer, it's much better because the effort is worth all the trouble of focusing on who's going to use your product or who's going to buy your product rather than focus on somebody else that's trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do.
And now today, as an investor, when startups come to you, what do you really look for? Especially, considering this may be school students who may be listening to us. So that,
the first thing is people. Okay. In the end, all businesses are made up of good people, right? If you have a good team, that makes all the difference. Right. So they can survive through difficult times, because not the entire time when you build a company, you're going to definitely face some good times, some hard times.
Right.
So the strongest people know how to work through the difficult times and come out of it successfully. Right. So you're looking for that characteristic in a human being who's starting a company. Right. And it's hard to know that at the beginning. So you have to make some guesses that this person knows what they're doing and that they will stay the course and they're taking a long-term view of how to build a business. So number one is team. So the people that I invest in. Number two is technology defensibility. And number three is the market size. How big is that market opportunity for that item? Right. So all those things are important. Yeah. 2 and 3 kind of go together. Yeah. And one stands alone. Number one, which is people, stands alone by itself. It's the most important thing.
Sure. Just elaborate a little bit on what technology defensibility might mean.
Yeah, what it really means is that you have some differentiation, some ability to put distance between yourself and whatever else might exist there already, so that you've got a moat around your business.
Okay.
So that somebody cannot break in and build the same thing you're building and take the... So if you had an idea is not a business, right? You have to have something behind it, which is your ability to execute it cleverly. Your technology is so different and so much better that it's a quantum improvement over something else, or it's a completely new way of thinking about the problem. And so it's a completely new type of solution that nobody else has in the market. In a way, if you think about eBay or Amazon, today they have a lot of technology defensibility, but when they started the company, it was really a business model differentiation. Anybody could have gone into that space in the beginning and tried to beat them at it. But so, for example, it could have been Walmart in the early days of Amazon. They could have said, let us do this, better. But then they needed to drop their old way of doing business and then do this in the new way, which is very hard for a company to do. So whenever there is this discontinuity, then usually a new player emerges in the market.
And how important is idea communication, do you think? Many times students, they are good at doing their projects, but they may not be either paying attention or good at communicating their projects. So
yeah, it's very, very important, because if you as a leader, if you're thinking of yourself as a founder of a company, you have to learn to communicate and communicate clearly and articulately and know what you're talking about, right? So that articulation and clarity of communication, that skill of being able to speak to people and have them listen to you and follow you, is very, very important as a leadership skill. So if they don't have that naturally, which a lot of people don't, I didn't grow up day one being a good communicator. It happens with time. But today there are many coaches for speaking, speaking classes. They help you get over the fear of speaking in front of large groups. All sorts of things exist. There's also a way to structure your thought process when you're talking and make sure that you're following that thought process nicely and clearly. All these things exist that didn't exist 20 years ago. And a lot of these tools are available online on YouTube and various other sites. There's a master class on leadership, for example. There's lots available today.
Right. And you're also suggesting that practicing in front of people makes a difference.
Absolutely. And you could also have a mentor or a coach.
Yeah.
I think every successful person usually looks up to somebody else in life. And for me, it was my mother, but, it was also my grandparents and what they did. But it could be different people. And then over time, who you look up to changes based on what you learn from them. I happen to be able to be lucky enough to work with Jim Clark, Mark Andreessen, Jeff Bezos, then Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and then now Sundar Pichai. So in that order, all these people at different times in my life and my career have been people that I've learned from. And age is not, you can't say because now I'm old, I don't have anything else to learn. You're always learning. So learning is not age-based. It's a continuous process through life.
Right. Yeah. It's a very, very important thing. And you say that if you listen, you learn. And many times we feel we've been listening. And what's the big deal about listening? Why do you think listening is hard?
Listening is not always hard, but it's hard because for some people, the mind wanders. And so they're not completely focused. For others, they like the skill of being able to talk to people, and so they don't necessarily listen well, but they can talk to others. So that's a different type of character trait or personality trait. That's helpful in some situations as a leader, but it's also hurtful if you're not able to listen and absorb from your own team some of the ideas that come across, because nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. In fact, the best ideas bubble up from the grassroots. That's why inside of companies, there is this rule that Jeff Bezos, for example, came up with, which is called the two pizza rule, which is teams cannot be larger than consuming two pizzas. So if it's two pizzas, that's probably three people, right? So if teams are larger than 3 or 4 people, then they're not. So he believed in small teams executing really well, as opposed to large teams, which in the age of the internet, where you're pushing out new products at very high velocity, It makes sense because then the small teams can be very granular. They can have very clear objectives and results that they can measure. And what you cannot measure, you cannot manage for. So it's important to be able to have measurable goals.
Yeah. Ram, what are you learning these days?
Well, these days I have an interest in medicine and biology and things like that, which is not something I learned through formal education. So I'm learning those areas and trying to understand how it is that science can advance in those areas, especially as we live through 2 years of this pandemic. Trying to understand how fragile life itself is interesting. I'm also learning about climate change and what's going on with that in the world today and how to mitigate for that. So that's another interesting area where the young people can get energized around that topic.
Right.
So those are a couple of areas where it, where I think the world needs to be focused on.
Right. If a student decides to focus on some area, whether it's medicine or climate change or something, are there any tips you can give as to where would one start? What would one do as few
The best
steps?
resource today is online. If the student is a good self-learner, there is so many free online sites, so much resource online that you don't have to go to Stanford physically to get an education. You can get it online by just looking at online.stanford.edu, for example, or looking at Coursera or edX or any of these places where there are numerous courses offered.
Okay.
Some are courses that you can just audit, but others are courses where you can actually get a certificate if you want and learn from it. And that is a process that's well worth the trouble. And there are many other places you can learn from. With climate change, there are numerous nonprofits that have also put up information online that's helpful to understand. For example, the importance of mangroves in the oceans to sequester, to collect carbon. So they're very helpful in climate change. The idea that you're planting trees and that you can measure from the foliage on the trees, you can measure the amount of carbon sequestered or collected per tree. And so the idea of planting a tree, growing more trees, making sure you respect the ecology around you. So those sorts of things.
Nice. Yeah, that's very good. So Ram, you and your wife, through your philanthropic arm, you also work with schools in fostering innovation and creativity. Why is that important, do you think, in schools in particular?
I think education is the foundational element for any individual or any society to ultimately succeed. If you have more educated people, both in terms of basic education, vocational education is fine too, because not everybody is going to go get a college degree. But having that basis of some foundational element of education is key to success in life and to actually so education leads to life skills. Life skills lead to success, both as an individual and as a contributor to society. Because what do we all strive for in life is ultimately to be a good member of society and to do something good, both for ourselves, our families, and then ultimately for the world around us that we live in, right?
Sure.
So that could be our immediate community, it could be the city you live in, and the broader aspect of the country, and then the world. But that includes things like, being good to the environment, being a person that actually is curious, understands something, and then reacts to that based on that understanding. So those kinds of learnings come from education. So the core of what you could give any child is education, I think. So if you just give them money, they're not going to actually learn life skills. Instead, it's better to teach them how to fish rather than give them fish.
Yeah, yeah. But where do you see opportunity in schools where elements of creativity and innovation can actually be inculcated there? Where do you see those
Yeah,
opportunities?
previously, I think in my generation in India, there was a lot of rote learning by memorizing. Now, I think they are realizing, and the foundational elements of good learning involves creativity, allowing the child to think free form and make judgments for themselves about what they're observing in the real world.
Right.
And so that process is leading to better results because what they memorize, they can eventually forget, and they won't fully logically understand what they just memorize and spit out and regurgitate. Whereas when you actually learn something, you're going through the problem set, you're trying to understand the different levels of the problem, you're going through each line by line, how to solve for it. And if you don't know and you're stuck, you have various online chat groups and different ways of learning it. Yeah, you're not just trying to get to an answer for the sake of getting to an answer. You actually need to learn the whole logical process of how you get to solving for a problem or learning for a new discipline, whatever the case may be. So that, I think, is that creativity is so important to fostering innovation later on.
Right.
And so today, doing that seems to have made a big difference in the startup culture in India. You see more and more young kids able to be very creative, very thoughtful, very innovative in how they are thinking about solving, not just for the opportunity that exists within India, but they're actually thinking bigger and solving for global opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. Ram, do you think, if internet and smartphones were the first 2 decades, kind of hallmarks of these first 2 decades, do you have any feeling as to what next 2 decades might be marked by?
What comes after the smartphone, I don't have a clear sense of it, obviously, but different people are working on different things. There's this company Neuralink that's working on brain implants. That's Elon Musk's company. There is the idea of using AR glasses and AR lenses, although I can see that as being intrusive as well. So I don't know how that's going to fare. It's not clear that everybody will go out and get one of those the way the smartphones have taken off. Smartphones are essentially, walking computers, handheld computers in your hand, and it's actually more powerful than most of us using PCs over the last, say, 20 years.
Yeah.
Today's smartphones are more powerful than those PCs. And most of our day, we treat the smartphone as our office, as our personal device to communicate with the family, everything, right? For information, it's all the information is available to you directly on your smartphone. I think it's such a powerful device that it'll have a long life before something else replaces it.
That's right.
Voice communication, talking to devices like Google Assistant and Alexa and so on is becoming more and more powerful, especially in a country like India, where a lot of people, don't actually read and write, but they can speak.
Yeah.
So if you go to the villages or the rural parts of India, the use of voice assistant is very high because they can actually use the voice assistant to speak to their phone and then get an answer back that's actually dictated back to them through the voice assistant.
And in many ways, in Indian context, there are many people for whom smartphone was their first device through which they had access to internet. Perhaps you feel voice communication could be of similar kind for them.
Voice communication is, but again, that revolution is happening inside the smartphone. So it will be, because there's so much computational activity going on, both on the phone and in the cloud, to make that all possible for the user.
Yeah, true.
So, but I think the big revolution in India is that the cost of data is so low, it's one of the lowest in the world, that I think it's going to result in a revolution in how people consume educational content.
Okay, can you
So
elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, they're going to consume that content on their smartphone, on their device. And if so, this is democratizing access to education.
Okay.
So lots of people will be able to use it to, download a problem set, listen to a class, or download a set of books that they want to read, and they read the book on their phone. I don't understand how today's kids can actually read a book on their phone, but they do.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is a big change. Most people read all the news on their phone. They don't actually, nobody gets a newspaper anymore. So these things have changed. Nobody listens to shortwave radio anymore. Their radio is Spotify or whatever it is. What is it called? Radio Mirchi or whatever in India, right?
That's true.
So those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, that's true. See, one of the challenges in India has also been that consumption in English versus vernacular, right? Do you see that as a potential barrier in Indian context while consuming this data, or you don't see?
It is to some degree, but that is also changing.
Okay.
Because there are so many language translation pairs that are now available through Google and other people, that you have the ability to translate from English to Hindi, for example, or from Japanese to Arabic. I mean, the language pairs that you can translate from one language to another is now so broad and so vast that if you go into a different city and you get a menu in that local language, you can actually show the camera of your phone onto the menu, and then it will convert it to English or whatever other language you are able to read. So those are powerful things that didn't exist before. Another example is you talk about learning with your smartphone. There is a product called Google Lens where you can just point to the image and you take a picture of that image. Let's say you see a little scorpion on the ground, or you see a flower and you want to know what it is. You take an image, it does an image match and then tells you this is what it is. So if you're curious about something, that's a way to learn, right? Another example of learning today for a child is there's this product called Foldscope, which is a basic microscope created by Manu Prakash.
Right.
It's now available in a lot of schools in India. I'm sure Agastya has some of those. If not, we should get you some. Yeah. But it allows a child to take this very low-cost microscope and look at bacteria just by walking around. True. And then upload it onto the site as a photo image using their smartphone device. Right. And it is kind of like the Instagram for bacteria.
No, that's fantastic. No, so we definitely have Foldscopes, and in fact, we did interview Manu Prakash as well, a few months ago. So I completely agree that there are. So you actually see a lot of opportunities where the language per se may not be such a big barrier, and it is one can really easily translate things from one to another.
Language is still a barrier, but it's becoming less so with again through technology.
Right.
Yeah. And within India, there are so many young companies now that have come up with, who are doing local language chat, for example.
True.
Chat is available in 20 Indian languages, which didn't used to be before. Right. So they have taken advantage of that opportunity because the global companies have not built chat to work in Bengali and in Urdu and so on, right? So there are local companies wanting to do that.
True. So Ram, you 40 years in Silicon Valley, you would have imbibed its culture. If you were to bring out one element which maybe we in India can borrow of Silicon Valley culture, what would be your pick, where you would suggest?
Yeah, that's a good question. Silicon Valley is a state of mind. It's not a place. Yeah. It is a mindset. It's a mindset to take risks, to be entrepreneurial, to go where nobody else has gone before, to try to do the impossible, to try to achieve success with very little capital, to try to go up, to be a David against Goliaths, to go up against big companies and succeed and overturn them. So that is all a state of mind. It's not a place, which is why the whole idea of Silicon Valley, which is this culture of how you think about taking on the world to succeed with your idea and then execute on it, that has now taken root in so many other geographies. You see Silicon Valley in Bangalore, you see Silicon Valley in Hyderabad, you see Silicon Valley in Mumbai, you see Silicon Valley in Delhi, you see Silicon Valley in Sweden, in Stockholm, you're seeing it in London, in Berlin. It's now all over the world, Dubai and so on, Singapore, etc. So it's happening everywhere. Sydney has had a few successes that are global successes now. So I think the idea that it is based on a specific place, that monopoly doesn't exist. It's like I said, nobody has a monopoly on ideas. So the same way Silicon Valley's core culture was a state of mind, and that has been successfully replicated in so many geographies now.
Any message or tips, closing tips for students who are listening, Steve?
I would say be bold, be ambitious, but be humble. And like you started off with the beginning, you can only succeed if you are able to be part of a team. You can't succeed alone. So being a good leader involves making sure that you can build a team.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. And there's a message from Agastya that I should give you, is that there's a legend which says that Agastya Rishi helped Rama when during his difficult times, when he was about to embark on this fight with Ravana. It so happened that during COVID times, when Agastya was in trouble, you were of big help to Agastya, and Agastya is really grateful for this gesture.
Thank you. That's a wonderful piece from the Ramayana.
Yeah. So any message for Agastya from your side?
No, I think continue to have big impact and continue to scale Agastya, but always focus on quality of the delivery to the kids rather than scale. So if it's a choice between scale and quality, go with quality first.
Okay, thank you so much.
Because the outcome for each child matters more than that you're going to touch more children with a lesser degree of a good outcome. It's more important to have a good outcome for every child than to just touch more children.
Sure. Thank you so much. Ram, it's a pleasure talking to you and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.